2 weeks ago, right after one of our meetings, I received an email very unexpectedly from my friend Lane. And in order to understand how special this message was, and before I tell you about what it told me, I want to tell you about how I met this person and how our relationship has kind of evolved. Lane and I first met 15 years ago. 15 years ago in 2009, I was just starting school down in Houston, Texas. And it was medical school, and my first few years, it was a pretty austere lifestyle. It was just wake up, study some more, eat dinner, exercise, study some more, go to sleep. I did that for like 2 years. It's crazy. Because of that, I was looking for ways to meet other people outside of what I was doing every day. And so I joined this community called Couchsurfing, and I was introduced to Couchsurfing from a former roommate of mine. I think Couchsurfing might predate Airbnb, but the idea is that you just list your couch on a website, and if people are traveling in town, they could ask to stay on your couch. And then it's kind of an exchange of friendship, but they don't pay to stay on your couch. So for about once a month for a year, I had a variety of people about once a month stay on my couch, and I got to meet a lot of interesting characters. Well, in January of 2010, I received an email from a person named Lane. He described himself as an artist and an art instructor from Dallas, Texas, who taught at Southern Methodist University, and he was going to be taking the Greyhound bus down to Houston to see a very specific exhibit, and he asked if he could stay with me. I said, of course. It just happened to coincide with the end of exams, so it worked out really nicely. Lane and I were able to have a lot of really great conversations about art and the exhibit that he was there to see, and we really hit it off, and he was a really nice person, and for me, it was just kind of refreshing to meet somebody outside of the science stuff that I did every day. Well, the next day when Lane left, I didn't really think we would see each other again. That's just usually how it happens with Couchsurfing. So I was surprised a year later when I got an email from him, and he said, "How are you doing? I'm going to be back in town for another art exhibit, and could I stay with you again?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great, of course." And that became our pattern. Every year or two, just out of the blue, I'd get an email from Lane asking how I was doing, letting me know that he was going to be taking the Greyhound down to Houston again to see an art exhibit, and asking if he could stay with me. Over time, my life changed. I got busier with school. I eventually started dating the woman who's now my wife, and so I got to introduce him to her, and when he would come down to Houston, then we would all go out to dinner, and I got to introduce her to this friend of mine who I had met through the Couchsurfing community. Well, in 2018, we moved up to northern Ohio, to Cleveland, so that I could continue my medical training there. And I continued to stay in touch with Lane by email. Every so often, we would shoot messages back and forth to catch up. At one point, we had talked about him coming up to visit us in Cleveland, but that was kind of squashed by the pandemic. But anyway, even though we were living far, far away from Texas, I continued to cross paths with Lane. One time, I had flown to Dallas Love Field Airport, and I was on my way somewhere through the airport, and the airport has a lot of rotating art that's on display, and usually I ignore it. I don't know why this time I didn't, but I saw an art display on the wall that caught my eye, and I leaned in to read who created that piece of art, and it said Lane Banks, and I thought, there's no way. So I sent an email to this guy, and he wrote me back, and he said, "Yeah, that's my art. It's on display at the airport right now." I was like, how cool is that? On another trip to Dallas, Lane and I actually met up. It was right after Christmas. We met up at a Luby's cafeteria and had lunch together before I flew back to Ohio. And again, it was just a chance for us to reconnect. Well, after 2020, our family moved to Southern California. We were living in San Diego, and life got busy again, and so I didn't write to Lane. I didn't hear from him, but I thought about him a lot. Every time I was in Dallas, especially while we were by the main SMU campus, I would think about what he was teaching, what kind of art he was making, how frequently has he been traveling the state to see other kinds of art exhibits, but I just hadn't heard from him. Well, that brings me to 2 weeks ago. I got an email, subject line just said, "Hey," and it was from Lane Banks. And he wrote to me just to check in to see how we were doing. He told me that he's continuing to teach art, that he's continuing to travel to see art. And in fact, later this month, he's going to be flying for the first time down to Houston to see another art exhibit. Well, for me, having now known this person for 15 years, this was just a really nice breath of fresh air to get his message, because his friendship has kind of changed with time, just as my professional work and experiences have changed with time. But it's really nice that we've been able to stay connected. The first thing I thought of when I saw his message and when I read it was, I thought about when we first met, when I was living that very monkish first year of school, and it kind of took me back to that moment. Much like a holiday tradition or a food or a smell can take you back to a part of your life that you can't exactly go back to ever again, but you can remember what it was like, and you can remember what your experiences were then, and you can reflect on how life has changed since then. And that's exactly what that message did for me. So my call to action for all of you is, should you have a friend or a family member that you have this kind of relationship with, maybe somebody you don't see all that often but you reconnect with from time to time, if you haven't heard from them recently, I'd encourage you to reach out. Maybe send a text or an email, because you just never know how that message might just make their day or maybe lead to a future speech. Thank you.